Hollywood Studios, aka formerly MGM Studios, has gone through many iterations of itself, and it's seen more turnover in attractions than the traditional Disney park, some of which have been particularly short-lived. So today, we're talking about my personal favorite of those short-lived attractions, a show that was the quintessential example of Michael Eisner's love of cross-promotion. It was an ambitious experiment in blending television and theme parks, and it started off as a smash hit. But it lacked some necessary forward-thinking planning and ultimately became a fairly forgotten piece of theme park history. This is the story of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Play It. I'm Mouselet One, and I just got back from a Disney trip, so if my voice is a little rough, apologies in advance. But for today's Mouselets Monday, we are continuing my Extinct Attraction series. And again, we're talking about a show that is very near and dear to my heart because it was my personal favorite growing up, and it's also another amazing example of Michael Eisner's love of corporate synergy, which we've talked about a ton on this channel. And if you don't know what I'm referring to, don't worry, we're going to get into it fully in a few minutes. If you experienced Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Play It, you know that it was an interactive game that was fairly ahead of its time. But it was also short-lived, and in the end, it served as a testament for what happens when pop culture moves faster than theme park planning. So to really understand this attraction, we have to go back to the year 1999, which is when Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Became the cultural event of the year.
What do you get when 115 million people watch one show? A phenomenon.
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? With more viewers, more excitement, more prize money than any other network primetime quiz show.
$250 million.
Be a part of the phenomenon. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Tonight on ABC.
There's a lot of interesting backstory that went into how Who Wants to Be a Millionaire actually came to be on television. I'm not going to go into that today because it's not really related to the theme parks, but I do recommend looking it up if you're curious. But all you really need to know is that prior to Millionaire launching, ABC was kind of struggling, and it was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire that really turned around the ratings. It was hosted by Regis Philbin, and it was averaging 30 million viewers per episode, the most watched show at the time, and again, the one that single-handedly saved ABC's struggling primetime lineup. And remember, ABC was owned by Disney, so Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was a Disney property. And what did our favorite CEO, Michael Eisner, love to do with his multiple Disney properties? That's right, cross-promotion. If you aren't familiar with this aspect of Michael Eisner, we do have an entire deep dive up about his time as CEO, and I highly recommend watching it because it ties into a lot of what was happening in the parks in the 90s and early 2000s. But as a very brief synopsis, Michael Eisner famously loved to take intellectual property that he owned in one area, like a show on ABC, and cross-promote it in the parks. It actually really revolutionized the way the parks worked and is still very prevalent today, but back in those days, it was a pretty new idea. So anyways, at this time, Eisner said, I have a Hollywood park, and it's meant to promote television and movies. So why not let guests star in my network's biggest show? And that is really how the idea for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Play It was born. So remember, it was 1999 when Millionaire kicked off and became literally a cultural phenomenon. The Imagineers needed to move quickly to strike while the iron is hot, so they worked with ABC starting in the year 2000 with the goal of opening at Hollywood Studios, then MGM Studios in Florida. They decided to put it in a location called the ABC Soundstage Theater. This was actually originally used for tapings of television shows and specials because when MGM opened, it was used as an actual studio. But that idea quickly didn't really work, and so attractions were needed to fill the space, and Millionaire was the perfect fit. And the idea was very simple because they wanted to replicate the Millionaire set exactly. The same lighting, the same music, the same graphics, even the same camera angles and transitions that you would see on the big screens. The only difference is that this version was fully interactive. Guests would enter a 500-seat studio audience, each which had a small keypad controller. And just like what happened in a real taping of Millionaire, they were acting as the studio audience, so they were instructed to cheer and clap and react as real audience members would. But they also got to play, so when the show began, the host would ask a fastest finger question, and whoever answered the most quickly with the correct answer got to go down into the hot seat. And that person got the chance to win collectible pins, which is why I personally was obsessed with the show, and a variety of other merchandise, which I'll talk about more in a few minutes. And then everyone from the audience could keep playing from their seats using the keypads. If you aren't familiar with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, it's basically 15 questions, each of which has an increasing dollar value, all the way up to $1 million. The questions, of course, get harder and harder as they progress, and each person in the hot seat gets 3 lifelines, which of course were also used in the Disney version with a slight twist. 50-50 was the same in that 2 answers would be eliminated, Ask the Audience was the same, where they would poll the audience. But instead of phone a friend, the Disney version had phone a complete stranger. Basically, they would call a phone located outside in the parks, and a random guest walking by would be selected in order to help the person in the hot seat answer the question. Before we continue on with our story, let's look at some sample questions that you may have experienced if you were watching this version of Millionaire. Some were Disney themed, like which Disney film featured a pig herder who went to find his missing pig. The correct answer is The Black Cauldron, although remember, in the actual game, there would be 4 answers for you to choose from. Another example would be who played Zorro in the Disney television series. The correct answer, Guy Williams. Others were based in history, like who was the first female African-American pilot. Answer, Bessie Coleman. Pop culture, like which sister was the oldest in the book Little Woman. Answer, Meg. And some were completely random, like poaching involves cooking something in what? The answer, liquid. And while this wasn't a Disney theme park and they want guests to always have a great time, the questions may have started out easy, but they got pretty challenging pretty quickly. Disney was handing out real prizes, which again we'll talk more about shortly, and they weren't going to do that without making the guests work for it. But before we get into the opening, one last thing to discuss. Imagineers and ABC knew that the success of this attraction was really going to depend on the hosts. So training for it was some of the most intensive of any live Disney show. They recruited both internal performers and local comedians and actors and made them go through a real game show host style audition, because this was a real game show. And once a host was selected and hired, the training took place inside the actual set. They learned about cue timing, since every single question and lighting change was coordinated with a live tech team. Audience warm-up techniques to keep 500 people energized between rounds. Emergency handling, like what to do if a keypad glitched or if a guest froze under the pressure. And overall, how to make the show a super lively and engaging experience no matter what may be going on. Behind the host, there was a full control booth that was managing the game. A question producer advanced each prompt on cue, and a scorekeeper tracked audience data in real time. Every show actually required at least 10 highly specialized cast members to run smoothly. A host, a co-host, a lighting director, 2 control operators, a stage manager, a prize runner, and the floor crew. And Imagineering also had to work closely with ABC's technical team in order to design a custom system that was capable of reading hundreds of keypad responses at once, which was a first for theme parks at the time. And keep all of this in mind as we continue, because what you really need to take away from everything I just said is that Millionaire required a lot in order to be able to run each show. Luckily, the attraction opened pretty quickly by Disney standards in April 2001.
The final answer?
Yes, final answer.
You got it right for 8,000 points. Nice job!
D is my final answer.
You just got yourself 1,000,000 points. Yeah!
And it was highly popular. People loved the real Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and they loved this version too for a few reasons. First of all, every show was unique depending on who played and how the crowd reacted. It felt spontaneous and authentic and interactive in a way that few attractions had been up until that point. And it also meant that it had a pretty high re-rideability index, something that wasn't super prevalent around Disney at the time. And secondly, while the prizes weren't cash, they were real. And it was one of very few ways that guests could try to get something free at Disney. At lower tiers, guests could win special pins, which is what I always wanted, hats and other merchandise exclusive to the attraction. But if you reached 1,000,000 points, Disney pulled out all the stops. Guests would win a Disney Cruise Line vacation for 4 and a golden ticket to watch a real taping of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in New York City. And so after its success in Florida, Disney opened a second version at California Adventure Park in September 2001. The show format was identical, although slightly smaller in scale, and again, guests loved it. They wanted to master the game and come back for another shot, and again, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was extremely popular nationwide. But that was all about to change. In 1999 and 2000, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was ABC's crown jewel. And like I said earlier, it really saved the network. So Michael Eisner and the executives at ABC decided to continue to run Millionaire more and more and more. And that meant that by 2002, ABC was running the show 5 nights a week. And unfortunately, that was just overexposure, and it meant that viewers became less and less interested. Originally, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was a must-watch event, but having it on every single night made it become routine. Ratings were falling fairly quickly, and the cultural buzz around it just wasn't there anymore, which unfortunately meant that fewer guests cared about playing the live version. Yes, it had amazing rewritability. Yes, you could win real prizes, But if you weren't connected to the intellectual property of the show, you weren't necessarily interested in watching it. After 2003, attendance began to drop sharply, and by 2005, shows were often half full. And remember what I said earlier, behind the scenes, Disney had a logistical problem that this show was really expensive to run. It required a full live specialized team, constant technical maintenance, and prize inventory. And unlike rides, which could run continually, Millionaire was a 30-minute show, which meant that it had limited throughput and higher costs. The California version closed first. It actually didn't even last a full 3 years, closing in August 2004 as part of the larger California Adventure rebrand. The Florida version did hold on until August 2006, but it was just never really able to find its footing again. Unfortunately, while aspects of Michael Eisner's love of cross-promotion were smart, tying a long-standing theme park attraction to a rocketing TV show wasn't necessarily the most forward-thinking idea, because it meant that the theme park attraction was really only as popular as the TV show was. And while Millionaire was super hot when it launched, TV shows just don't tend to have the same staying power that something like a classic Disney movie would. So when Millionaire closed, the set was removed and made way for Toy Story Mania, which ironically was a ride that was actually influenced by Mania. Because remember, Millionaire was a very interactive experience, something Disney hadn't really experimented with before. And its success meant that guests were looking for more of that. And we saw that come back with Toy Story Mania. And generally speaking, it proved that guests did want interactivity. While it may not make sense to tie it to an IP like a TV show, there definitely is an appetite for it in theme parks, and we've seen that continue throughout the next 2 decades. And this attraction was also really one of the last examples of the Michael Eisner synergy era. If you watched our full Michael Eisner deep dive, you know that at this point in time, things were kind of falling apart for him. And honestly, this is another example to add to that list. But in many ways, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play-It is a perfect time capsule of this particular period at Disney. It was a super flashy show, it was turned around very quickly from its initial concept, and it was deeply tied to something that was trending elsewhere in the Disney company. And again, it was one of my personal favorites. This show was unbelievably unique, and honestly, I don't even know if Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is still on TV, but I would love the chance to play it again as an adult, because I think that it really captured something that we haven't seen in the Disney park since. Anyways, if you love Disney history, facts, secrets, and more, follow us because we post deep dives every single Monday. And we also have our podcast Sisters, which comes out Thursdays for a bit of lighter Disney chit chat. For now, thanks for watching and we'll see you next week. Bye.